Master Eusebius, why don't we attack? We have the advantage.
Yes, but wouldn't you like even more of an advantage?
What more do we need?
We always need more of an advantage, Artemios. Don't forget that. More advantage means fewer lives lost, for both sides often. You'll find quickly that war is less a matter of killing people than of keeping people alive. The right people. If someone has to die, make it the enemy. But by the end of it all, the people you are fighting for want their warriors back alive. And the people we are fighting today will be our allies before the day is up. Some of them, anyway.
So we'll just use cowardly tactics?
Yes. Rocks and arrows shall do our work for us. Against a foe like this, there is no shame, for they are masters of the bow. That we are able to excel them at their own game is only going to bring them despair. Maybe they'll even surrender.
You really think that?
No, they never surrender until they realize their honor isn't worth more than their lives. We'll have to press them a little more.
What if they attack suddenly?
A worry indeed. These Cataroi have fierce lancers and crazed horses, but if we're careful to keep spears close by at all times, they'll be dissuaded from any rash moves. And of course, that means
that we have the initiative.
Exactly. We can do whatever we want in this formation. And what I want to do is kill the ugly ones before our men get close enough to be offended by their faces.
I thought the Bosporans were an oppressed people that we're here to save from the nomads.
That's right. No one ever said they had to be pretty. That's another thing to keep in mind. There are many people, many different ways to live and fight in this world. But you have to see they're all worth something. Don't disrespect them. A former slave like you should appreciate that better than most. Fight for the rights of even the most despicable, and you'll have a chance of achieving your mission.
It's not my mission yet. This world peace talk is your thing.
And if you don't keep it going, I'll be haunting you soon enough.
Don't talk like that. Anyway, looks like the enemy are getting restless.
Yes, no way to escape, but no way to attack. In the end, most men decide it's better to try, or to be seen trying, than to respect the odds and leave. This is where the battle will end, and where the blood will be spilled. Now why don't you come with me and show me that you can outfight a 73-year-old man?
Yes, sir. Hoplites! Shields on the Strategos! Show them the fury of the daemons! Welcome back at long last to Massalia Tales, where Eusebius and the daemons of Polymus are pressing against the Cataroi, a nomadic faction that has occupied the port of Phanagoria, previously belonging to the Hellenic faction Archebosphorus. Eusebius has been called out here to liberate them from these invaders, and so far things are going pretty well. We've blocked off choke points with spearmen and are using archers to skirmish with the enemy. The enemy have loads of horse archers. This is a classic steppe army we're facing, but our foot archers are able to out-skirmish them in this engagement, and their foot soldiers are not going to be able at all to break through the heavy hoplite lines of the daemons, which are being led by Eusebius himself in his 70s, still fighting on the front line, because he is one of Massalia's truly heroic warriors, and he is supported, as we saw earlier, from various archer forces, skirmishers. We've got reserve forces ready to deploy that we don't need. The javelins are going to completely cut down the enemy's infantry here, and we're also going to have support from sea as Evios brings in his naval crew, which you already saw as well, to bombard the enemy with artillery and regular foot soldiers landing at the beaches. The enemy do try and fire back at me. They start skirmishing unsuccessfully, I might add. They actually focus their fire on my heavy infantry rather than my archers, so the heavy infantry just sit behind their shields taking the arrows, while my foot archers, who have superior range and ability to these horse archers, are able to just keep cutting them down, and I'm creeping up with my spearmen, gradually penning the enemy in. And I'm about to complete the surrounding of the enemy as Evios' marines come down from a beach they landed out further along the battlefield to occupy the centre of the town. They'll be both on the capture point and behind the enemy's main force. He's also bringing in his ships to point-blank range, including the artillery ships, to support the attack even further. The enemy are in huge trouble. You can see on the balance bar that we have thoroughly defeated the enemy even before actually making our advance into the town. Just this gradual creep and skirmish tactic has really worn the enemy down, and the few men remaining aren't going to last much longer. We are taking casualties. You can see here some of my hoplites have taken so many arrows from these big hordes of horse archers the enemy have that they were unable to be protected by their shields. But the enemy at this point break just as we complete our action of surrounding them. Evios sends his men in to try and catch some of the fleeing soldiers. Eusebius is going to hold back and let them go. The battle is fairly easily won, and this could be Eusebius' last engagement. It was one he had to sail a long way to fight, and the battle was over very quickly, but he's been successful. The Daemons once again proving they're unbeatable on the battlefield, even making dangerous port assaults in an unfamiliar land. Let's take a look at the battle results. After the Catarii are defeated, we can see losses were mainly concentrated in one regiment, which took the brunt of the enemy's archer fire during the skirmish. Overall, though, our force is fine. The enemy's main force, which is all cavalry, as you can see, was wiped out. Some of the garrison as well destroyed. We can now liberate Archibosphorus and create a new Hellenic faction up here on the edge of the Black Sea. They previously occupied this area right back at the start of the game, but the Catarii and the Sakaruka, two nomadic factions, have basically conquered all of their lands, and we're going to try and help them get them back. Eusebius is going to guard the bridge leading north because there's plenty of enemy forces nearby we're going to have to watch out for. Evios, leading his now much larger fleet than before, is going to join Iphianassa in moving north to look at what's here at Tanis. You can see there's a fleet in the port. Evios can use his ships to create a zone of control buffer to stop them from getting out of that little area. So now we have them under control, and Iphianassa can sit there and spy. It might be possible for either Archibosphorus or Eusebius to move north and take them out if they don't sally out against Evios, that is. So this whole area around this little part of the sea coming off the Black Sea, the Crimea basically, needs to be part of the Archibosphorus. So that's our objective over there. Now, for anyone who's new to the series, I thought I'd quickly show you what Massalia's core domain looks like and just provide a reminder for everyone else. You can see we control lots of southern Gaul and Germania, a slice of Iberia and a slice of Africa, sharing the area in general with our two big allies, Carthage and the Ardiae, an Illyrian faction controlling Italia. So the area is all really peaceful, as is most of the Mediterranean, but we do have a few enemies deeper into the barbarian north, and we've got an enemy down there in the east, which we'll see right now, because we're going to follow the adventure of Cretheus. Cretheus has gone on a quest. He, as part of cementing his alliance with the Egyptian kingdom, has become a little bit enamored with Alexander the Great and has decided that he's going to take it upon himself to do something similar. He's got an army that loosely mimics the force of Alexander the Great, a classic Macedonian phalanx style force in a uniquely Massalian twist, adding in Celtic cavalry and war dogs. And he's going to use that to try and make his name here in the Indo-Asian area, where he's going to conquer his way through these rich and fertile lands. He starts here at Seleucia, but right away faces heavy resistance. He's not going to be able to assault this massive city right away. He'll need to stop and try and siege these guys out, or tempt them into a field battle where perhaps the fight will be a little bit easier, but even then, the balance bar doesn't look good. He's got a lot of faith in his upgraded phalanx line though, so hopefully if the battle does come to it, he'll be able to hold out and he isn't going to be cut down at the first hurdle on his little expedition for glory. So we're going to leave him conducting that siege and now jump over to another expedition involving Massalian forces. This is the expedition of Heracleides, who's going to war against the Dumoni, a Brittonic faction. We're here fighting these guys at the request of some of our client states, the Namnutes and the Carnutes, who are on our flanks here in Gaul. He is a staunch upholder of Republican values and really wants to help out our client states in order to enforce our power in the region. And the Dumoni had been raiding south against those factions, so he is here to put an end to it. Unfortunately, after he landed, he encountered a huge hidden army of heavy, experienced troops led by an extremely experienced general. The enemy's force is stronger than his and has better leadership, but he's going to have to win, and win with enough forces intact to fight their other army defending their port stronghold if he wants to put a stop to their raiding. This is going to be a dangerous battle for Heracleides, but hopefully his legionaries will be able to pull through.
Soldiers of Massalia, you are here to make good on the debt we took out for peace. I cannot disobey the will of the Republic.
and you cannot disobey the will of your commander. This is the way of order, the way that our foes have forsaken. They pillage and plunder those who call themselves Massalians. That is enough crime to warrant death for any man. But these men do not even understand the concept of society, know nothing of trade, nothing even of paying their soldiers for their work. These are truly a backward people, above us in their minds but beneath us in reality. It is time for we, the men chosen for the privilege of acting on behalf of our people, to make the world grateful that our sword work is on hand to destroy such barbarians. The battle begins. Heracles deploys his formation, ready to advance across this big open space towards where the Dumoni tribe is waiting. His army is very different to the one we saw Eusebius using earlier. He has more advanced hoplites, but his main line consists of thorax legionaries, a powerful late-game unit designed to emulate the power of Roman soldiers with heavy armor, big shields, slow-moving units, and elite training. We approached the enemy's formation. A lot of the enemy was hidden. They have a lot of guerrilla units, so only now that we're close did I notice how wide their line really was. I had to start thinning out my ranks. The enemy does have a numerical advantage, so we're going to have a thin line against their thicker one, but my troops should be able to hold out even with that situation because of their superior discipline. Taking a closer look at the enemy line, we can see they have light spears on the ends, but the main bulk of their force is this guerrilla unit. They don't look particularly heavily armed or armoured, even though their stats are actually very comparable to my own legionaries because they're so leveled up. They're basically very experienced with what they have, so they're going to be able to match us in combat except for morale. The enemy have a couple of spear reserves at the back and a big skirmish line in front, another super leveled up set of slingers I believe. And for us, we don't really have anything to counter these slingers. We don't have any long range troops at all in this army. We're really just a sort of tortoise army that's going to advance in bulk and just ram into the enemy without a skirmish phase. So I'm hoping that the super disciplined thorax legionaries can just rush under the missile fire and drive the enemy back. I advance at a walking pace towards the enemy, and then when I get close, break into a run as the enemy skirmishers are going to start firing. I've got these spear units on the edge of the line, which are going to be a tiny bit of a liability in a charge because they're going to be significantly slower than the legionaries because they need to stop and form phalanx just in case the enemy hit them before they reach the enemy's line. You can see there the stones coming in, pretty much bouncing off the legionaries for their big shields and heavy armor. They can get away with it. On the edges here you can see what I mentioned. These guys are stopping to form up properly and get their phalanx ready because the enemy are charging them, and that means they're being left behind as the rest of the legionaries charge on, opening up gaps on both flanks of the line. Luckily, the enemy don't seem particularly interested in exploiting that. They just want a full frontal engagement, and that's what the legionaries are going to give them. That's what I want. My guys should be able to win over time in a full frontal engagement, even though the enemy's experience will mean it's not going to be as easy as it should be. We were able to lock down pretty much all of the melee troops on the enemy's side like this. They had a couple of reserve spears at the back which are going to deploy right away. They're not going to exploit our flanks very much. The flanks are the dodgy situation in our formation with these phalanxes which are going to be very exposed. Luckily, of course, we've got Peltas, and Peltas are going to be able to really damage any units they get too close. And in the center here, the Peltas are just going to throw into the big blobs of enemy units. We've got huge targets here. The enemy are lightly armored. Those Peltas should do a lot of damage and start depleting the enemy's numbers very fast. And now I'm going to exploit my main advantage in this fight, cavalry advantage. The enemy's cavalry rush into the melee, so they're not going to try and stop me, meaning I'm free to do things like this heavy lancer charge into the back of the enemy's sword units, a devastating attack that will kill many and really shake their morale, which, as I mentioned, is the enemy's weak point. Here in the center, I charged in cavalry to fight with the enemy's cavalry in the blob. There are skirmishers in there too, so hopefully they'll get some kills against them. On my right, the enemy's left, we've got a similar deal happening. We've got lancers and regular cavalry, the Celtic cavalry here, charging in against the enemy. The enemy's skirmishers here sort of ran back and actually received the charge full frontally. Now you can see actually there, the enemy's skirmishers have a sneaky advantage that I wasn't really aware of before this battle, which is that these Bretonic skirmishers are actually spearmen. When they engage in melee, they pull out spears and receive a bonus against cavalry, meaning they're not as easy to take down with cavalry as the average skirmish unit for most factions. So we do have to be a little careful here. On the other side of the battlefield, you can see I've released dogs onto the enemy's flank. Those dogs will kill some of the enemies, but more importantly, they'll stop routing units coming back from shattering because they'll just chase them off the field. The dog handlers themselves now engaging in melee with a low-level spear unit. I'm pretty low on units, so I needed to use them in battle. Luckily, they're very experienced, so they actually have higher stats than the average handling unit and will do okay. Now, as the first cycle charge comes to an end, you can see tons of enemies retreating out with my cavalry. It had a really devastating impact on their morale. And of course, there's not much that's going to stop me from doing this again, but for the fact all the routing troops are in the way, so there isn't actually a proper gap to make a charge anymore, so I have to let them leave. The enemy's general, who is their best unit, is fighting against my shock cav in melee, which is actually quite bad. The shock cav will take heavy casualties until I notice this is going on. We've got legionaries nearby who will charge in a moment to deal with them, and in the meantime they're throwing javelins in. The javelins, of course, are a very effective way to deal with these guys because they're so good in melee. They're better than my legionaries, so I don't really want to have to kill them sword to sword. The javelins will do just as well. But the rest of the enemy's army is in huge trouble. As you can see, we've got them totally surrounded cavalry-wise. They've lost a lot of their infantry to routing, and now once I've dealt with all these routing troops and cleared up some space, I will be able to go in again and make another charge, the second cycle, which will do a lot of damage. Here you can see those dogs, as I mentioned, just chasing the routing units off the field so they shatter rather than coming back later. There's one unit here which they didn't do that to, unfortunately, which is coming back from routing. It's giving a nice volley of javelins to the flank of my pike phalanx there, but luckily Heracles himself deployed his cavalry to deal with this. The heavy cavalry charge kills a decent number of them, and now we have such an advantage in sheer stats that I can just let them slog out against them, and they should win. So we're starting to see some charges now happening again. This tiny enemy line here in front of these legionaries being devastated by a little cavalry attack. I think the enemy's really on the back foot now. You can see the balance bar is shifting quite far in my favour at this point. We just have to kill these few survivors who are holding on, and then we'll have parts of the line broken up so we can surround the pockets of resistance and take them out. At this point, Heracles pretty much has this one in the bag. We just have to minimise our losses, of course, which is going to be very important because this battle is basically going to happen again in the very near future. The enemy has another army and their garrison army to contend with. Seeing their army losses, the enemy decides to fall back. A lot of their commander's regiment had also been defeated, so their commander's morale probably wasn't too high. And now in the rout, I need to chase down the enemy commander because he's super high level, so I don't want to miss this opportunity to take out this really high-ranking general by just having my cavalry focus on him and taking him out. Meanwhile, all the infantry, especially my peltasts, which were fresh and able to run out after the enemy, are spreading out over the battlefield and cutting down these enemy stragglers all over the place. There was a very loosely spaced melee going on here. The main focus for me was just sending as many units as I could after the enemy general's unit, and that's what's happening there in the background. And in that big blob in the background there, I think we killed the enemy's general around this point, so I decided to bring the battle to a close, not wishing to waste any more time. The important business had been done. It's a heroic victory for Heracles, exactly what he needed in this situation. He's totally minimized his losses, broken through this powerful army, and now actually has to face an even more powerful one as it turns out, so it's lucky so many of his troops were left alive. Let's go back and see the battle results.
Greeks, we have all heard of them. We have all sold a slave or two to them. They had their world and we had ours. That is the natural state of things that has lasted as long as our sages have told histories. But these times are strange indeed, when the Greeks come and kill at mere request. Do not misunderstand me. The Dumoni were not a tribe worthy of preservation. But to these Greeks we are all the same. That is why my heart grows heavy when I hear of the countless unburied bodies, the countless families destroyed by this man, this Heracleides. We must make sure this situation remains in our hands. So here I propose an ultimatum, if you will all agree. If any Greek at arms sets foot on our lands, then we shall declare them invaders and make war.
So that battle went pretty well for Heracles. We can see on the battle results, we killed pretty much 10 times as many troops as we lost. In our force, a couple of regiments down to yellow on the troop bar, so damaged in the battle, but definitely not out of action at this point. I'm going to enslave the large number of captives we took and send them back to our lands to work on reparations for the damage these guys have done to our client states. A few survivors from the army head west, but we're not interested in them. We can head east now towards their settlement. Hopefully the survivors won't get involved in this battle, because we are going to have to siege them out. You'll see here there's a massive advantage for the enemy on the balance bar. They have another powerful army defending the settlement, and their garrison is really upgraded with tons of experience as well. So they have a decent force that really outnumbers us here. They've got pretty much triple our numbers coming onto the field, so we're going to have to be a little bit careful if we make a siege assault. I'd rather tempt them out into a field battle, so I'm going to wait at least one turn, taking attrition while I do it, mind you, to see if they sally out. I can though actually upgrade the Eyes of Ares to reduce their siege attrition right there, which is quite handy for this situation. Now back over in the east, the Cataroi suddenly moved their fleet to attack Eusebius' fleet, sorry. This is a terrible move from the enemy, as you can see on the balance bar. I'm not sure what they were thinking here. Eusebius' fleet is bigger and more powerful ship to ship, so he is easily able to destroy them and send the surviving ships scurrying back. So not 100% sure if they thought they could get through there, but we've definitely shown them that they can't. So with that complete, the Dumoni now come and offer me a peace treaty. They still want me to give them some money for it, so they seem to think they have the upper hand in this engagement. I turn the tables and say, be my client state, and then there'll be peace, which is my acceptable terms. They say no, offer a white peace instead. I turn that down again, and now they make the attack I was hoping for. You can see the Iceni army nearby has also stood right on the battlefield. They're not at war with either the Dumoni or us. They seem to just be observing in this particular situation, so we can ignore them. So we've got to face this army. It's not as powerful man for man as the last army we faced, but it's much bigger, as we said, and it also has lots of javelinmen, and javelinmen of course are very strong against heavy infantry, which is the basis of my army, which means the enemy has a little bit more of a dangerous troop composition this time around. One advantage I do have though is that they're splitting their army up between a main fielded army and reinforcements. I deploy my army on top of a small hill, but I immediately start moving forwards because I want to get this battle started as soon as possible, because you can see the enemy here moving up. In fact, you can't see most of them because they have loads of those guerrilla units again, so we can only see a couple of them. We don't know how long their line's going to be, but we can see right in the distance their reinforcements coming on. So we want to engage the enemy's first army and try and at least batter it down before the reinforcements join the fight, so that the enemy can't get a massive advantage before we begin. We can see here the enemy's skirmish line is giant, this time deployed behind their main melee line as far as I can tell from the little bit I can see on the edge there. So the enemy's skirmish advantage is rather large. We're going to want to get into melee as soon as possible, and because the skirmishers are behind the enemy's lines, we're probably going to have to raid back there to try and stop them just throwing javelins or stones over the top of the main fight into our troops. So I'm just going to advance right at them, and I need to extend my line, guessing how long the enemy's line is from their skirmish line so that we have the enemy fully engaged. We can't see the enemy's reinforcements anymore, so I think the next time I'll see them is the second they arrive, because they'll come up over a hill, so it's going to be hard to judge how much time I have, but I'll just be as fast as possible. The enemy bombard me with javelins and then charge into the melee just like before. My legionaries moving forwards to meet them. My legionaries will have more of an advantage in the straight fight this time, but the enemy stats are high enough that they're going to last a long time, definitely until the enemy's reinforcements get here, so we can't break them with a straight frontal engagement. Now, as I mentioned, what I really need to do is get forces behind the enemy's army and just keep driving these skirmishers away, keeping them away from the front lines, because they have potential to do big damage here, whilst I want my skirmishers, my peltasts, to focus on the enemy's infantry rather than counter skirmishing. The enemy have heavy cavalry coming around on my left flank. I had to counter with Heracles' cavalry, his very heavy cav, because that will be able to beat them. And when they charge, you can see the enemy's numbers drop quite a lot, their morale dropping too. But another heavy cavalry unit hits my medium cavalry, and this time the engagement goes the other way. I lose loads of my cavalry immediately. I'm going to attack them with shock cav. It won't make much of a difference, and Heracles is going to have to go in with his bodyguards to try and sort that out. Behind the enemy's lines, an attack by some of my cavalry and spearmen on the edge of the line have managed to break a couple of the enemy's skirmishing units, most of them just running away, which is what I expected. I just need to drive them away, I don't need to kill them right now. And even if the enemy just focus their skirmishing on those units behind the line, that's fine. I'm willing to sacrifice those units if it means keeping the main line safe. It's still not quite safe. You can see this pike phalanx that had its formation broken up, and it's taking javelins while it's sitting here trying to reform. Those javelin are now falling back as I can start advancing, because the enemy actually fighting me were beginning to break now. So a little bit of dodge dodgy situation there, but it's resolving itself quite nicely. The main fight's actually going okay, especially because I rear attack some of the enemy with my spears, and this unit of shock cav is really sacrificing itself, as I mentioned. It's just going backwards and forwards, hitting enemy units and then going to hit other ones. Most of these skirmish units actually have spears as a backup weapon, so they're really not able to fight with them in melee very well. My heavy cavalry, having one out on the flank led by Heracles, are now going to fight with some spearmen as well, only skirmisher spearmen, so they hopefully will do okay because of the sheer weight of their cavalry. We'll be able to beat them back and win that flank, but now you can see the massive horde of enemy reinforcement troops. These troops are better than the enemy's main line, more upgraded troops. They're about to join the battle. Luckily we've driven off some of the enemy so we can reform to receive them, but the true battle is actually about to start.
Oh yes, I heard. Makes me laugh. Poor Heracles, being made my puppet. He objected so much when I asked him to lead that campaign. He thinks that killing barbarians is actually going to make things worse. Maybe he was even right, who knows. I just wish I could be there with him. Do you know how fun it is being old? I can't train, I can't talk at the peak, I can't even lead the men on the border patrols anymore. All I'm good for now is making sure that at least someone is actually fighting our real enemies close to home. You heard about Cretheus, didn't you? He still sends me orders occasionally. Sends me orders. People like him for some reason, even though he's clearly gone crazy. Oh dear. This poor republic is really going to struggle when I'm gone. Now it's time for round 2. The enemy's reinforcements start their attack. I'm making another counter charge to try and receive them with a little bit of charge bonus. Both sides charging slowly because we're both tired. That's the advantage I do have. The enemy aren't bringing in fresh troops necessarily because they had to rush them across the battlefield. So at least the enemy won't have that advantage against me. They also seem to be focused on the salients in my line, meaning parts further back in the line aren't engaged by the enemy's next charge, which will give me a bit of a chance to maneuver around and perhaps get some flanking attacks on the enemy. The problem was that I had to stop my cavalry attack on the enemy's rear while the enemy spearmen were coming through, so I couldn't hit the skirmishers, but my war dogs were doing a great job of disrupting the enemy's rear at the same time. You can see here they're just annihilating a routing unit, so they won't be coming back anytime soon, and those war dogs are going to do a great job at hitting the enemy in the back and chasing the skirmishers around. So it's starting to become once again a slugfest as my legionaries attempt to fight in melee with the enemy's forces, who vastly outnumber them, as you can see. The enemy having a distinct advantage on the balance bar overall, but our men having that all-important morale advantage, so we're holding on and there's still plenty of hope that will grind the enemy down. Here on our left flank, Heracles and the cavalry are now engaging on cycle charges, trying to chip away at the edge of the enemy's line here. They've got skirmishers who can be driven away, and they've got some more powerful warriors, the garrison warriors, who are actually quite decent here. We really don't do all that much damage. I had to do a lot of cycles there to actually start depleting their numbers. That was a very hard part of the enemy's line. Behind their line, I've got some shock cavalry once again trying to disrupt the enemy skirmishers, but they have to get out of there because there's just so many skirmishers, and because they are a spear unit, the losses aren't really acceptable, and I need to keep the unit at least alive so it can threaten the enemy even with a few members of its squad left. Heracles here doing a cycle charge, rushing out and drawing the enemy's spear skirmishers away from the fight. The spear skirmishers were eager to engage with the cavalry, probably thinking they have an advantage, but in that big loose formation, and with the cavalry having such a local numerical advantage, and some of the cavalry being very heavy, we're well able to actually totally surround, envelop that unit, and start killing members of it. So we're going to be able to drive those skirmishers away and free up space for more cavalry charges. Behind the lines, the dogs are doing a great job at driving the enemy skirmishers away here as well, which is exactly what we need. The dogs are actually pretty good in melee combat versus skirmishers, so they're killing a lot of them and causing them to skirmish away. So the enemy's huge skirmish advantage, which was something I was really worried about at this point, really isn't becoming an issue because all of the skirmishers are just getting preoccupied dealing with my little cavalry attacks and dogs. So the main melee fight, where I think eventually I will have an advantage, is going to slowly go my way. Here we've got one enemy unit totally surrounded. I'm using peltasts in melee to try and inflict morale shocks on them. It's not doing all that well. You see the enemy still fighting them while surrounded at many points, but slowly as they lose men as well, they all want to leave the situation. Another part of the battle line is cleared up so I can divert some legionaries to rear attack another blob of enemy troops. Here we've got skirmishers engaging my really depleted pike phalanx from the front. The skirmishers probably were responsible for most of the killing of that phalanx. It's lost half its men, and now they've come in out of ammunition to fight with them, and that's probably where they'll lose. The pike phalanx will do absolutely fine.
Here the enemy is still swarming all over the place on my left flank, and my cycle charges are still coming in. You can see they don't get particularly deep. My horsemen are getting tired at this point, and it's a very flat piece of terrain to charge across. We can't get a real bit of momentum to hit into them with, and the enemy's morale is quite decent, especially in those garrisoned warriors, so we're really unable to dislodge them from that area. The enemy are now starting to deploy their own very heavy cav with their general coming in here to fight in melee with my peltists. Peltists of course won't last too long in this situation, but I'm going to try and get them out. And the enemy's general needs to flee because my pikemen will come in to support. We've got a big section of enemy infantry totally surrounded here, but they're fighting on very valiantly. They're exhausted, surrounded by superior troops, but they're not giving up, even though some of them are only militia and garrison units. Incredible morale from the enemy here. I was hoping to win out eventually, but it's going to take a long time by the looks of things. Here comes another cycle charge. We started to clear up the left flank a little bit. The garrison warriors, the best unit that I keep mentioning, is still there, and they're going to be there until the end. Another cycle charge fails to really make an impact, hitting them on the flank. Tons of enemy skirmishers behind them are fleeing down the hill. You can see I sent a unit of peltists to enact this, to chase them off, along with some of my other freed up infantry units, the dogs there. They're looking a bit unsure of what to do. The problem is that those peltists are going to be chased by the enemy's heavy cavalry. Those very heavy cav are getting a nice downhill charge into the back of the peltists, and you can see it sends them flying all over the place. This is a very damaging attack for this unit. So they're actually in trouble because I can't really support them either. I don't have any nearby spear units or cavalry units that can come in to help them out. So they basically just continue running down the hill, escaping from the cavalry to continue with their original mission of engaging with the slingers, who they do manage to get into melee. So they might kill some of them there, but they themselves will be heavily damaged by the cavalry attacking their rear. Luckily, back on top of the hill, the balance bar is evening out as we start to rout some units and now slaughter them in the ensuing escape. Most of them being surrounded and not going to be able to get out with their lives, which means the enemy will be very depleted now. At this point, victory is kind of a certainty, even though the balance bar still portrays the enemy as having a decent chance against us, just because we have all of the main body of their melee infantry trapped. They can't do anything, they can't do any tactics against us, and we'll win out eventually. Apparently the enemy realised this because suddenly the balance bar goes from being about half for both sides to completely in my favour. We get a huge chain rout all across the enemy forces. All those skirmishers, mostly untouched skirmishing units, start to escape from the battlefield down the hill. I'm going to send out my cavalry to chase some of the enemy as they escape, especially some of the units that have full strength, because we want to try and grind them down a bit, because we are going to have to fight these guys again right afterwards, because this was a siege sally and now we have to move on to the siege assault. The more we kill here, the easier that will be, and it's very likely we're going to be able to have an auto-resolve because we're killing massive numbers of enemy troops in this battle. So I chase them down for a bit, and once I've decided I've got enough of them, I end the battle. It's a heroic victory for Heracles, the second heroic victory of this episode. He's done very well against the Dumoni. We've really got them pinned down. We're going to be able to finish them off next time, I think. And the matter of the invasions of our colonies in France, our allied colonies, will be resolved, but of course there may be consequences to his harsh military action. And next time we'll also see how Cretheus faces the first major counterattack from his enemy, the Parthivans. The three Massalian expeditions heralded a new phase in the Republic's history. It was no longer acting within its own sphere of influence, instead branching out to enforce their power across the known world. They were not the most powerful state by far, but they were the most famous. The names of the Massalian heroes, Zenon, Eusebius, Gelon and Cretheus, were familiar to all men of politics, and according to a survey of sources from the time period, were likely known even to people living on the edge of the classical world, such as the Sakurauka, a nomadic people of the steppes. But even with all this fame, the unwanted arrival of Massalian forces was not something these distant people were likely to appreciate.